Gary Varvel. Welcome back.
John Branyan, welcome back. And welcome back to me. That's John Branyan. I'm Gary Varvel, and this is Wise Fools. It's not the Bible study you want, it's the Bible study that you need.
That is absolutely true.
I was in Florida last week. It's good to be back in Indiana where it's cold.
And the snow is wafting to the ground where I'm at.
Is it really?
Yeah, I don't know what it's doing that far south.
I have that wintry mix where I'm at in Brownsburg.
Wintry mix. Sounds like something you might pour into your bowl at breakfast time.
Wintry mix.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Doctor's here. He's handing out warm drinks and appetizers. Dale's here. Good to see her. Jeff Lane is here. Let's see. How's Word Watcher? Hello.
I'm impressed that people joined us early.
I know. I was kind of thinking it would be a smaller group.
Yeah, I thought we might lose people.
We probably will lose a few.
Yeah.
Some people are not done working and some people are not done. I apologize. I have another meeting that I have to be at tonight at 7. So we're doing this early. Sorry. My fault.
Who knows? We might like this early time.
Maybe. We'll be back at I think we'll be back next week. Depends. I mean, if everybody goes, 5:30 is great. We should do it every week. Then we can do that. But if a bunch of people go, I wasn't even off work yet. You losers.
Yeah.
So it's been a few weeks.
I forgot. Some people have to work, don't they?
Yeah, some people have to work. Yeah. I've got 2 streams that I'm supposed to do on Thursday. The other one got canceled this week, and so I have one ahead of this, and then I have Wise Fools. So it's a busy day for me. And my internet, as you know, is not the most reliable internet in the world.
I thought I wanted to point out that where you are, which looks like where I'm at, it's it's nighttime where you are, but it looks like it's still daylight outside where I'm at.
Yeah. Remember a few months ago you took a picture of your background?
Yeah. I think when I took a picture of it, I think I was a little higher. I was about like that. And so this is where I'm at. Okay.
Yeah.
We're in Genesis chapter 26 tonight. Oh, I don't know if you heard, but there's a war going on.
I have heard.
It's not just a rumor of a war. It's a real war. So here's the interesting thing I've noticed about this is that, Putin's been a bad guy for a long time. And was it 2014 or 15? He went into Chechnya and took that over, and then he was pretty quiet during the Trump years, and now he's after a year of Biden, and I think he's decided to move in and take back Ukraine. At one time, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, I guess, and so now he's decided he wants to go back in. And it's been a few years ago where he had his puppet leader who was there, and that guy got ousted, and so a new leader of Ukraine came in that wasn't beholden to Putin, and I think that he's gotten tired of that, and he's decided nobody's going to stop me. I'm just going to go in and take it. Here's the interesting thing. I've thought for a long time, what would actually motivate Russia to go to war with Israel? Because they seem to be satisfied within their own borders. But Ezekiel 38 and 39 says there's coming a war of Gog and Magog and Persia and Put, and so it lists several countries there. And when we were in Genesis chapter 11, and we were going through, was it 11 or 12? Anyway, we were going through, maybe it was chapter 10. We were going through the genealogies. That's in chapter 10. Genealogies of the descendants after Noah. Mm-hmm. And we came across a guy named Magog. And they settled in the land to the north, and they became the Magogites. And if you go directly north of Jerusalem, you run into Moscow eventually. So that's the major land that's north of Israel. But so it looks like that. I think other Bible scholars believe that Ezekiel 38 and 39 is talking about a war in which Russia will join hands with Iran which was originally Persia up until like 1935, became Iran. So those two countries, and then some other countries, are going to get involved and attack Israel. And I thought, boy, I don't think that's going to happen in our lifetime because Putin seems to be pretty satisfied where he's at. Well, now he's starting to get more aggressive, and the nations are slapping sanctions on him. But it doesn't look like he cares very much. So, is this the first step toward that eventual outcome? Because that's going to happen. I wrote about this some time ago in my newsletter. I had a guy who said, "Oh no, Gary, you're wrong. That already all that already happened." It was Artaxerxes. Was it Artaxerxes who came against him, and that's what that happened. I disagree. I think when you look at a book of Ezekiel and you have chapter 36 and 37, which were about the regathering from the four corners of the earth of bringing the Jews back to their land, and then the war of Gog and Magog happens in chapter 38 and 39. And then when you get to chapter 40 and on, it's talking about the millennial reign of Christ. I believe it's a different time period. It seems like that it seems to be in chronological order. And so I think that is a future event. And then when you get to the end of the millennial reign of Christ, you're going to have another Gog and Magog war. So there's going to be, but the Bible says clearly that what's happened in the past will happen again. There's nothing new under the sun. So you do have these events through time that kind of repeat themselves. And I believe that that's what we're looking at. This is not the Gog and Magog war. This is a precursor probably. But it's certainly Putin is becoming more aggressive. In fact, I thought this was interesting this week, and then I'll be done. General Kellogg, who was an advisor to Vice President Pence when he was in office, foreign advisor, I saw him interviewed on Fox, and he said that when he watched the press conference with Putin talking to his generals and his staff, he said, "I have never seen him like that before." He said, "I have listened in on 18 phone calls with him and Donald Trump." And he said, "I've never seen the man more aggressive." He said, "There's something changed about him." Interesting. I thought that was pretty interesting. Now, here's one thing I don't know. Gog, I think Magog is a land, just like Persia is a land. But most people, when they read that, they believe that Gog is actually a person, like a title for, and that doesn't fit because, as far as I know, no one in Russia calls Putin Gog or their leaders Gog.
I don't know.
Yeah, Jeff Lane mentions that it there's been talk that Putin wants to put the old USSR back together, the Soviet Union. That could be
Russia, the old country.
All right.
So we've got 35 verses tonight in Genesis 26. So that's 17 for one of us and 18 for another one, right?
Yeah. I don't care, whichever you want, first, second.
Okay. I'll do the first. I'll do the first 18.
Okay.
I'll do the heavy lifting.
Okay. All right.
Genesis 26. Now there was a famine in the land, besides the earlier famine of Abraham's time, and Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. The Lord appeared to Isaac and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land where I tell you to live. Stay in this land for a while, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands and will confirm the oath I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and will give them all lands. And through your offspring, all the nations of the earth will be blessed, because Abraham obeyed me and kept my requirements, my commands, my decrees, and my laws." So Isaac stayed in Gerar. When the men of that place asked him about his wife, he said, "She's my sister," because he was afraid to say, "She is my wife." He thought, "The men of this place might kill me on account of Rebekah, because she's beautiful." When Isaac had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked down from a window and saw Isaac caressing his wife Rebekah. So Abimelech summoned Isaac and said, "She is really your wife. Why did you say she is my sister?" Isaac answered, "Because I thought I might lose my life on account of her." Then Abimelech said, "What is this you've done to us? One of the men might have slept with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." So Abimelech gave orders to all the people, "Anyone who molests this man or his wife shall surely be put to death." Isaac planted crops in that land, and the same year reaped 100-fold, because the Lord blessed him. The man became rich, and his wealth continued to grow until he became very wealthy. He had so many flocks and herds and servants that the Philistines envied him. So all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the time of his father Abraham, the Philistines stopped up, filling them with earth. Then Abimelech said to Isaac, "Move away from us. You have become too powerful for us." So Isaac moved away from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. Isaac reopened the wells that had been dug in the time of his father, which the Philistines had stopped up after Abraham died, and gave them the same names his father had given them.
And I'm reading in the New Living Translation. Isaac's servants also dug in the Gerar Valley and discovered a well of fresh water. But then the shepherds from Gerar came and claimed the spring. "This is our water," they said, and they argued over it with Isaac's herdsmen. So Isaac named the well Esek, which means argument. Isaac then dug another well, but again there was a dispute over it, so Isaac named it Sitnah, which means hostility. Abandoning that one, Isaac moved on and dug another well. This time there was no dispute over it, so Isaac named the place Rehoboth, which means open space. For he said, at last, the Lord has created enough space for us to prosper in this land. From there, Isaac moved to Beersheba, where the Lord appeared to him on the night of his arrival. "I am the God of your father Abraham," he said. "Do not be afraid, for I am with you and will bless you. I will multiply your descendants, and they will become a great nation. I will do this because of my promise to Abraham, my servant." Then Isaac built an altar there and worshiped the Lord. He set up his camp at that place, and his servants dug another well. One day, King Abimelech came from Gerar with his advisor Ahuzah and also Phicol, his army commander. "Why have you come here?" Isaac asked. "You obviously hate me since you kicked me off your land." They replied, "We can plainly see that the Lord is with you, so we want to enter into a sworn agreement or treaty with you. Let's make a covenant. Swear that you will not harm us, just as we have never troubled you. We have always treated you well, and we sent you away from us in peace. And now look how the Lord has blessed you." So Isaac prepared a covenant feast to celebrate the treaty, and they ate and drank together. Early the next morning, they each took a solemn oath not to interfere with each other. Then Isaac sent them home again, and they left him in peace. That very day, Isaac's servants came and told him about a new well they had dug. "We found water," they exclaimed. So Isaac named the well Shibah, which means oath. And to this day, the town that grew up there is called Beersheba, which means well of the oath. At the age of 40, Esau married 2 Hittite wives, Judith, the daughter of Beeri, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon. But Esau's wives made life miserable for Isaac and Rebekah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that ends kind of interestingly. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the reading of your word. Thank you for this chapter, and I pray that you'd speak to us through it. Help us in our discussion to learn and to apply these things, these truths to our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. Another severe famine. We were talking before we went live that this is very similar. Some of the things here that happened is very similar to what happened with Abraham. So like father, like son.
Right.
So first of all, there's a famine. The first thing they do when there's a famine is they, leave town and
go to Egypt.
But God speaks to Isaac and told him not to go. And so he obeyed the Lord, and then he moved from there and moved down to Gerar, which we had heard before.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a king there named Abimelech. But this is not the same Abimelech that dealt with Abraham, because the event that we're reading here was like 100 years after what we read about in chapter 20 and 21 with Abimelech and Abraham. So this is a different Abimelech, still king of the Philistines, but this is a much later time. So
There was a couple of, somebody suggested that it could have been the same one. It doesn't have to be, but somebody said that the name of the commanding officer is the same.
was it the
Um,
same?
it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same Abimelech.
If it
It's
is,
likely
if
it
it
was a
is,
title.
okay, yeah, but if it is the same one, this guy's old
He's
by this
old.
point. He's an old
Well, people were
man. So
living about
Abraham's
200
dead.
years. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, Abraham died at what, 175,
Hmm.
and Sarah was 137 when she died. So so then, John, tell us what happened when they go down to Gerar. What's Isaac do?
Well, he does the same thing that Abraham did. With he's worried
So
that his wife is going to get him into trouble. That he's going to get killed because she's such a looker. That they're going to kill him and take her away.
were there a rash of husband murders back then? Was it,
I,
if you had a good looking wife, you had a death sentence, you had a target on your back? What is
I
going
don't.
on?
There seems to be something to that because it's generational now.
Yeah.
Uh, but it didn't happen with Abraham, and it didn't happen with Isaac either. Both of them, they were found out that they were not telling the truth, and then they basically got scolded. Hey, why did you lie to us? That could have been, whew, that could have been really serious
Yeah,
if we'd
exactly.
have taken your wife. But and so I always thought that was interesting too. That they seem to have
Uh-huh.
some sort of a standard of decency or moral or ethic or
Yeah.
whatever, even though
Yeah.
they weren't technically, I mean, they were pagans, but they still seem to have some regard for the arrangement of marriage, which I
So
think
it
is
seems
interesting.
like it would be okay to kill the husband to get the wife, but you don't want to sleep with her if she's married.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know what's going on there, but so it
Nerdbaum's husband
reminds me
worries
of a
about that too.
it reminds me of reminds me of a old '60s song, a song back in the '60s. If you want to be happy for the rest of your life, never make a
Never
pretty
make a
woman
pretty
your
woman your
wife.
wife. So, from my personal point of view, get an ugly girl to marry you.
Marry
Yeah.
you. Yes, right. We
Yeah.
are dating ourselves, but all
Well,
right.
if you're worried about that, it is on the one hand, both of them have been reminded of this covenant. Abraham and Isaac both. There's a covenant you're going to have. You're going to be the father of many nations. You're going to have so many descendants. You're not going to be able to count them all. And so there's that. And then
Yeah.
there's this fear that their wife is going to be taken away from them. And so,
Mhm.
they're like typical followers of God. They just don't have a whole lot of faith sometimes.
Yeah, so yeah, they have the promise of God, and then all of a sudden, this irrational fear that comes up. If
Hmm.
they were really claiming the promise of God, then they shouldn't be fearing that, because God's going to see that He would, a pastor I used to know used to say that the man of God in the will of God is immortal till the plan of God is done. Now, I don't know exactly what God's plan for me is. I have an idea, but I don't know when that plan is going to be done. In the case of King David, David was promised he was going to be king, and then Saul was trying to kill him for like 15 years.
Hmm.
But in David's running for his life, do you think it would be possible for David to have died? No, because God had already promised him, "You're going to be king." Uh, he was immortal until that was going to happen, at least.
Hmm.
Uh, we don't have exactly that promise, but it makes sense that the man of God and the woman of God should be in the will of God. That's your best plan, because then
Hmm.
God will see that whatever he's planned for you is accomplished. Uh, so interesting, the same kind of thing here. Abimelech sees Isaac caressing not his sister. He was
No,
caressing her in such a way he knew that's not your sister, that's your
that's
wife.
not your
And so
sister.
he calls him on it. And then he says, I was afraid for my life. So then Abimelech chastises him and then makes a decree. Anybody who touches these two or messes with them, then they're going to be killed. So they're left alone.
And that again is interesting to me that you've got these powerful
Mm-hmm.
people who were slighted by Isaac, and there's no consequences to speak of, which is,
Mm-hmm.
I think, testimony to that's the covenant in place.
Mm-hmm.
God is
Mm-hmm.
shielding them from their, and rather than being angry with them, they're like, well, this could have been really bad for us, so let's make a
Yeah,
covenant. Let's make a covenant so that we don't get in trouble with your God. They seem to have a respect for
they do.
Isaac's God.
And his father has had a relationship with the Philistines in the past, so
Hmm.
uh, there may have been that recognition. I would have to think that they're living in kind of the same area, that they would have to know that God blessed Abraham, made him wealthy, and now his son Isaac now is being blessed as well. And of course, that becomes a case later on as well, because they talk about that.
Right.
So interesting that everything that Isaac touches really gets blessed. So he plants in verse 12, he plants and he harvests 100 times more grain than he planted. And with that, then he's able to sell and do business, and he gains even more wealth because now he's getting more flocks, and his wealth continues to grow. Um, and the Philistines recognize that he's getting blessed a lot more than we are. And so what happens is now you have this jealousy that takes
Hmm.
place. And so what do? This is human nature. I'm going to go fill in your wells. I'm going to do something to you that you don't like, and let's see what you do about it.
Right.
So this is going to happen to all of us at one time. Not that our well gets filled in, but somebody is going to try to cancel you or do something to you that is trying to elicit a response from you. And Isaac, amazingly, handles it pretty well. Just moves on. It makes me think of
Right.
a verse, Romans 12:18. I don't have that called up, but I can take a look real fast. Romans 12:18, which says, "If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." Uh, so sometimes it's not possible, but if it is possible, try to live at peace with everyone. In this
Hmm.
case, Isaac and his group, they're pretty much nomads, and they're living in tents so they can move around, and they don't own the property they're on, and so he just moves. And yet, the other interesting thing that I think that happens here, John, is that when he moves, then instead of, you know, I'm going to die on this well that you've just filled in and fight about it, he moves on. He moves to another well that his father had dug, and then they redig that one, and then they end up doing it again.
And then they
Here,
fight over that.
one of the principles I read from Matthew Henry commentary was that the principle here is that we should go back and dig into what our fathers before us have already dug. In other words, when they have dug into truth, we should go and find out what did they discover, and receive that to ourselves, make that part of us. And and then what we're going to see later on is when they go to Beersheba, then they find the water in a new well, and it's almost like an expansion. We're standing on the shoulders of giants that have come before us. We can learn from what they had learned, of the truth of Scripture, and then we can continue to find new truths that are in the Word of God. Things that, like in the book of Daniel, chapter 12, uh, he even says that in the last days, knowledge will be increased. Well, it's increased. One of the reasons is because now we've lived history. In fact, when Daniel was given a prophecy about future empires, well, they hadn't come on the scene yet. So we're on the other side of history from them. We can look back and see, oh yeah, that's how that lines up. The visions that he had been given and the word that had been given from Gabriel, it all came true. And that increases our faith, and also we can see going forward how that connects with our time period, and even going forward in the New Testament, so that shadows of the Old Testament cast themselves onto the New Testament, and then we can make sense of it even more so than they could back then. All right, so I took a
Right.
long time to explain that one truth, but I think that makes a lot of sense.
Well, I think that there is um, a lot of wisdom that we ignore because because it's old.
Yeah,
We have a tendency to dispatch information because it's ancient.
yeah,
So many people, skeptics and cynics of the Bible, have said, "Well, your ancient book of fairy tales that was written,
mm-hmm,
you know,
mm-hmm,
centuries ago," and there's just assumption among many people that because something is old, it's no longer relevant, or because it's old, it's wrong.
mm-hmm,
It's not
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
it's not of value anymore. And I do think that we have a giant blind spot that's brought about by technology, because we tend to think of advancements in time based on technology. We
Yeah,
look at the way
yeah,
technology has changed, and we go, "Oh, well, it's better now." But we extrapolate that to everything else about human existence. We're not more moral. We're not more righteous. We're not more sophisticated when it comes to our ability to follow the laws and commandments of God. We're
mm-hmm,
not any more. We're not any better equipped to do that than they were in Abraham and Isaac's day. We
mm-hmm,
that has not moved forward at all. The only thing
mm-hmm.
that's advanced has been technology, and so I think it's a mistake for us to go, "Hey, look, we've got computers in our pockets now that, like you're saying, will gives us access to information, at the touch of a button. Therefore, we're doing better than they were doing. We know more than they knew back then,
Right.
but we don't. It's the
We
same.
don't.
It's the same knowledge that they had when it comes to the things of God and what it is to pursue God. Technology makes that easier in some aspects, but I think it's a mistake to measure our advancement just by our technology.
I agree. And when you really sit down and look and read some of the stuff that was written, a long time ago, it's incredible. The education system that they had, yeah, they didn't have the technical advances that we have now, but
Mm-hmm.
uh, read some of the writings of the founding fathers. Uh, and when you think about, for instance, Thomas Jefferson, he was the ambassador to France at the age of 14. I'm sorry, but when I was 14, I was stupid, really stupid. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't make me the ambassador of anything. But he
Mm-hmm.
was very gifted, but he had an educational system that taught him a lot of stuff early on. And uh, so, yeah, the tendency is to think that we're the smartest generations ever lived. I don't think
Right.
that's true. Uh,
Right.
and human nature is the same in every generation. We're all a bunch of sinners. Our default is that. It takes an act of God to change us, to not want to continue in that sin. Um,
Yeah. Well,
so
I think it sort of makes us lazy sometimes
yeah,
too, because
yeah, it does.
we can look things up, so we
Yeah,
don't do research. We just rely on search engines.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
we don't. Yeah.
Yeah. When you think of the old days, back when you had to really, you had to go get an encyclopedia.
Hmm.
You had to go to the library and research stuff. It was a lot harder than it is today. Yeah, we're
Hmm.
walking around with a library in our pocket all the
Right.
time. You can look up anything.
Right. And it's cool. I mean,
Yeah, it is.
it's really convenient.
It speeds
Um,
things up, certainly.
it does. But at the same time, technology has become a distraction
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. You know, particularly as the metaverse continues to expand and people
Hmm.
start to become, ingrained in virtual reality. That's not going to go away. That's also going to continue to advance and eventually, maybe not for us, but 30 years from now, 40 years from now, when telephones are integrated into the internet and the metaverse. It may be that's how meetings and everything takes place. Now we're doing Zoom, but it's not
Yeah.
that hard to conceive of everybody wearing a headset and going into a virtual room, and that's just how we interact. And what's that going to mean?
Yeah.
What's
Good
that going to
question.
do to our?
And then you've got like Elon Musk who wants to put like these things in our brains that actually expand into your brain
Right.
so that we can control the internet and we can control things. We can from just our thoughts. Turn the light on, just think it, and it turns on. I mean, that's what they're thinking. And so, where does it end? We would become transhumans, and if you ever want to blow your mind, look that up on the internet. Transhumanism, and it's pretty wild about what people are thinking.
Well, that's all of that. All of the knowledge that we have is built, like you said, on a foundation that was laid a long, long time ago. Um,
Hmm.
and I all that to say, I agree with you. I think that that it is good to go back and look at old things and old knowledge and see where we've come from,
Hmm.
um, and exercise our minds, and don't just write things off because they're old. Don't just don't just dismiss it because
Right,
it's been
right.
around a long time.
I wanted to point out in verse 23 it says here from there Isaac moved to Beersheba where the Lord appeared to him on the night of his arrival. I am in and then God speaks to him. I am the God of your father Abraham, he said. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants. So the thing I wanted to point out here is that some people would think that, um, and this is what we have to think about. Let's say you're at a job and things are going well, not going well. Maybe you can't get along with somebody.
Hmm.
It's making your life miserable. Here's the question: is God allowing this into your life to move you to where He wants you? So Isaac, what he did was when he got into conflict with these people, he just moved. And then they had more conflict, and he moved again. And he ended up moving to Beersheba. And then the Lord appears to him, giving him confidence. This is where I want you. All right. You were supposed to go down to Gerar for a time. That's where I wanted you then. But now this is where I want you now. I mean, I left a job, and uh, and I can tell now this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to be doing now, and this is the new season. And so we have to, when trouble comes into your life, you have to consider what's the Lord wanting to do with me here. Where's He wanting me to go? Uh, and maybe it's a matter of He wants to move you to something that you wouldn't have chosen on your own. Now we talked about that with Abraham from the very beginning. He tells him in the Ur of the Chaldees, "I want you to move to a place you've never been." And so he, being obedient to the Lord, he moves. This time, Isaac doesn't have the Lord speaking to him and telling him to move. He gets into a situation and decides to move, and then the Lord confirms it by showing up here. And then it says in verse 25, then Isaac built an altar there and worshiped the Lord. He set up his camp at that place, and his servants dug another well. So he takes his faith, his religion with him wherever he goes. And that's the way we should be. That's the way the early Christians were. They got driven out of Jerusalem, but no matter where they went, Christianity spread because they would tell people about Jesus, and that's what we should be doing.
It's difficult to know whether you're encountering a wall or a door sometimes.
Yes,
Um,
it is.
and I, I don't know. I don't think that there's a formula. I don't think there's one correct method of deciding, whether it's time to change and move on, or whether you're supposed to dig in and put up a fight, so to speak.
Right, right.
I don't know. I've commented many times, I think, on this Bible study, how it would be handy if God would just speak the way He apparently spoke to
Hmm.
some of the patriarchs, so that we know, oh, it's God talking. Okay, now I know. Now I know what to do. But even with that picture, the idea that God is talking to them, they they seem to demonstrate an awful lot of uncertainty, and they do a lot of dumb things,
Sure,
even though
sure.
God is talking directly to them. And so I think probably that even if God was to yell at me in some manner, I probably still would not know for sure. I'd probably still be uncertain. Um,
So one thing I don't want people to misunderstand is I'm not saying that if you get into some kind of scrape with somebody, you're supposed to up and move. No,
mhm.
that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that he was in a land that wasn't his. It was easy for him to get up and move to. But let's say that you're established here, and let's say the government tells your church, okay, you can't meet on Sunday, or you can't preach from the Bible because that's hate speech. Well, now we have to take a stand. Now we have to, because we this country was founded on biblical principles. We have the Constitution. We have the freedom of religion is the First Amendment. It's in the First Amendment. So now we have to stand up and say no further. Yes. And that takes courage and it takes boldness. In Joshua, the first couple of chapters, it says, "Be strong and courageous," and it keeps saying it over and over. And that's the way Christians need to be. We should not be afraid of men. We should or government. Our fear should only be for the with the Lord. And if we know the Lord, then we shouldn't fear man because they really can't do anything to us. Uh, they they could destroy the body, but they can't destroy the soul because that belongs to God. But that's where we need to pull up our big boy pants and take a stand.
Well, there's been I think there's always been sacrifices that people were supposed to make, even when things were good, even back in the good old
Hmm.
days when everybody had a sort of a Judeo-Christian ethic, and if you went to church, it was generally considered to be a good thing. If
Hmm.
you read the Bible, it wasn't considered
Yeah.
to be hate speech. Back not that long ago, 50 years ago, um, and even then, I think that there was a call to people to be willing to give up things and to move on, to use your
Hmm.
illustration. And it's always been pretty easy in the United States to be uh, to be comfortable.
Hmm.
It doesn't really, persecution is not real hard persecution in the United States. It hasn't been. That's not to say that it won't be someday, but it really hasn't been difficult.
Right.
The worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to lose a job, or you're going to make a
Hmm.
group of people who you thought were your friends unhappy, and they're going to ostracize you. But you're not going to get burned at the stake for standing up for your faith.
No.
You
The key principle we have to keep in mind too is that Jesus said, "Well, blessed are you when you're persecuted for my name's sake, and
Hmm.
great is your reward in heaven." So those are promises that we should be encouraged by when we get into it. For one thing, the world has now identified you as being a Christ follower if you take a stand. Right? Nancy Manning mentioned something here that I think was true. She said they didn't have the Holy Spirit. She's talking about the Old Testament saints. They didn't have the indwelling Holy Spirit. That didn't come until Pentecost. And so there were a lot of times they didn't know, they didn't have a word from God. They also didn't have the scriptures written out yet. So
Hmm.
they're kind of flying blind. And they, they would just have to hold on to when the Lord spoke to them and told them something. So that's a good point. I'm glad she brought that up. That's right.
Yeah.
Um, so ultimately, so the Bible does say that the Lord can make even your enemies live at peace with you. And that's kind of what happened here. Now, Abimelech and his people drove Isaac away, but then Abimelech comes to him because he sees how God is blessing him and he wants to be friends with them because
Hmm.
maybe some of that'll rub off, you know? And so Abimelech comes to him. And I think it's interesting that Isaac doesn't let him off the hook right off the bat. I mean, he says, "Why have you come to me? That's obviously you hate me because you drove me off your land."
Right.
And then Abimelech tries to smooth it over and says, "Oh, we didn't do anything. We didn't do anything to you." Uh, and so, uh, but
Well, he
then
said
they
they were
they make
getting, there was
peace.
too many of them. We just can't, you can't be here. You're just too, there's too much, too many flocks, too many people. You got to move on. You're crowding us.
And then the same thing happened when those 400 years when the Jewish people were in Egypt. They became too numerous,
Hmm.
and so the Egyptians had to make them slaves, or they were going to rule everything. And so
Hmm.
they tried to make them second class citizens, and that's why God at the right time brings them out. Remember when we were going through the part with Abraham, God prophesied to Abraham that was going to happen to them. One thing that for
Hmm.
our time period now, one thing to keep in mind. I posted a cartoon recently, and somebody called me a Zionist. Obviously, Gary, you're a Zionist.
Hmm.
So look, uh, I go back to what the promise that God made to Abraham. Uh, Abraham, God told Abraham, "I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you." So yes, I believe that Israel, the land of Israel, belongs to the Jewish people. Now, does that mean I agree with everything the Jewish people or the government does? No, but I'm not gonna
Yeah.
I'm not going to be against them because God has blessed them and chosen them to be there. And and I think look up in Joel chapter 3 verse 2 if you can look that up. Just want to point that out that it's something interesting. This is a little bit of a rabbit trail I'm going down here for a second, but sometimes there's interesting things on rabbit trails. Joel chapter 3 verse 2. I have to look at it here. I can't see. Can you read that for me? Because I'm having a hard
I
time
will
seeing it.
gather the armies of the world into the valley of Jehoshaphat. There I will judge them for harming my people, my special possession, for scattering my people among the nations, and for dividing up my land.
Okay, that's it right there. So they harmed God's people, and God was bringing judgment on those nations. The last part of that is that they divided up my land. So this idea for that you can have peace for land, land for peace, that's never going to work. God's not going to allow that. God has given that to the Jewish people. And the last time that Israel gave up a chunk of land was they gave up the Gaza. They gave up Gaza for to the Palestinians.
Hmm.
And Ariel Sharon did that. And not long after he did that, then he had a stroke and never recovered from it. And he was in a coma for a long, long time, for years before he finally died. And I just think that God brings judgment on anybody who's trying to divide up the land for peace. When Trump was in office, he tried to give the idea that to Netanyahu, "You guys need to get off the West Bank." And Netanyahu said, "No, we're not doing that." And I thought Trump was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're back. This is, in my opinion, this is the fulfillment of Ezekiel 36 and 37. It's not the full fulfillment. Physically, it's the fulfillment. It's still ongoing. Not every Jewish person lives there, but there's more Jewish people living in the land of Israel than has ever lived there now. And now that those verses also, in those two chapters also say that there will be a spiritual rebirth of Israel, and they're not there yet. So you have a physical, but not the spiritual yet. That will happen in the future. All right.
Esau.
Yes. Well, let's talk about this.
Couple of Hittites.
Now, remember, Abraham did not want Isaac to marry a Hittite woman.
Mm-hmm.
You remember he told his servant, "I want you to go to the land of my fathers, and don't do it. Whatever you do not let him marry a Hittite woman."
Mm-hmm.
And then Esau, that's what he does. He marries two of them.
Right, because he couldn't decide which one. So
I guess
married them both. The idea of being separate is a thing that we don't really think about it very much, particularly in the United States, where we are the melting pot. We are all about diversity and everybody get with everybody else and mix it up, and not just marriage, but just in general. Our whole culture is about everybody mixing up and getting together, and so I don't know. There's pros and cons. There's something, if you're talking about diversity of culture, if you're talking about ideas, customs, certain traditions and things like that, then it's kind of rich if you've got all of these different ideas coming together. But if you're talking about a religion, if you're talking about a philosophy, then bad things happen when you
that's the big problem. Yeah.
Mix stuff together. Yeah.
And the last verse of this chapter, but Esau's wives made life miserable for Isaac and Rebekah. And I think that we can only speculate what caused the big problem. It could have been, part of it was the wives maybe were bugging Isaac because hey, Esau's the firstborn. He should have gotten all the good stuff, and he got cheated. I imagine that was probably an ongoing thing. The other problem too might have been too that the Hittites had foreign gods, and so that could have been a problem too. And that gets to what you were saying. We're not to be unequally yoked together with unbelievers or people who believe in not the one true God. And because that's going to cause problems. And then when you have children, then how do you raise them? What are you teaching them? And the idea that I'm just going to let my children decide on their own. Well, you don't let them decide what to drink poison to see if they like it or not. You don't. There's a lot of things that you teach your children not to do. And when you get into the religious realm, obviously there's a lot of spiritual poison out there that Satan would love people to drink of. Because it'll ruin them, it'll destroy them and their families. So, but whatever happened here, Esau just seemed to make one mistake after another. He didn't take the Creator God seriously, treated it as a light thing, and we don't know all the conversations that took place, but I would have thought that they could have been told the story, from Isaac's perspective. Yeah, my dad would not let me marry a Hittite woman, and that's why he said,
Right.
But this is what we have. Interesting.
I've always thought it was interesting, the whole birthright thing.
Yeah.
With Jacob and Esau. When when I was a kid, I thought, well, okay, so he tricked his dad and he gave him the birthright. Why didn't he just take it back and give it to Esau? But or yeah, because but there is apparently something about about your word, and once you
Yes.
say a
Yeah.
thing and once you do a thing, not everything can be not everything can be undone and taken back. And that's a
Yeah.
concept that's also foreign to us. We don't really put a whole lot of stock and value on rituals or
Hmm.
on our word.
Hmm.
Like if once we say a thing, it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna let me take that back and massage it a little bit and send it out again. But I think the lesson that I learned, at least, is that sometimes once a thing is done, then the thing is done, and you can't you can't undo it. And
Right.
sometimes it's not just. Sometimes injustice happens. Sometimes mistakes happen, but those mistakes are done, and you can't undo them. And no
And
amount
and
of
how
yeah.
and however, Jacob was deceptive in how he got that done,
Hmm.
in getting the birthright. But at the same time, this was prophesied to Sarah that this was going to happen. Not Sarah, to Rebecca.
Rebecca.
Was that Rebecca? No, yeah, Rebecca. Yeah, Rebecca was told by God that the the older will serve the younger. That the younger was going to get the blessing, basically,
Mm,
and that's the way it happened. Now there was some deception involved, but
quite a bit
uh,
of deception,
yes,
but
but God knew that, and you're right. Once Isaac had given his word, he couldn't go back on it.
right.
But it
So
looks like, from what we know, and also what it says about Esau in the New Testament, he was not the kind of character that God wanted uh, for to carry on the patriarchy, um, and so he did something different, which God has every right to do.
he does. He does.
Well, we got, and that should be also an interesting lesson for us as especially with people with young children, is you want them to marry well. And as I've said before, you can't choose who your kids will fall in love with, but you can kind of
Hmm.
choose what uh, gallery they're picking from, or what corral they're picking from. You can decide where to move, where you would have a better chance. Like, for instance, taking the church is a good idea. That's probably a good environment. I hope you have a good church where the truth of God's being taught and they would learn. And then, obviously, when you're raising kids, you got to live it at home. If you don't live it at home, your kids they'll know that it's not real to you. It's not going to be real to them.
That's true. That's true. All right. So next week, Genesis 27. That's the whole Isaac and Jacob and Esau thing that we were just talking about. So that's next
Yeah,
week.
yeah. Next week. All
Next week will
right.
be at the regular time too, at 7,
Okay.
as far as
Seven
I know.
o'clock. Thanks for joining us, everybody, early. I appreciate
Thanks
it.
for joining us early, you guys, and we will see you next